One of these Mondays, I'm going to match Heather Scott Partington's hair.
It's good.
It's so good.
And we're live.
We're live. We're going to hang out and wait just in case anyone can see us right now. We're going to be about 15 seconds delayed. I'm Beth Spotswood, and I'm filling that time with these words. The painting behind me was done by my Uncle Bill, a resident of Chico, California, subscriber to Alta magazine. It was my wedding gift from him. I'm gonna wait just another minute. If you're just tuning in and joining us, hang out for a minute. I'm Beth Spotswood. I'm the Alta's digital editor. And this is my living room where I've been trapped and will continue to be trapped until at least May 3rd. All right. I think probably we're good to go. Okay. Hi, again, I'm Beth Spotswood and I'm Alta's digital editor. Thank you for joining us for episode 2 of Alta Asks Live, the digital video version of Alta Asks, an author interview series we do here at altaonline.com. Today, our interviewer, author, teacher, book critic, and Alta contributor, Heather Scott Partington, returns, thank you, Heather, to speak with columnist, author, and Alta contributor, Vanessa Hua. Vanessa is here to discuss her new collection of short stories, Deceit and Other Possibilities, among other exciting things. Their chat will last about 30 minutes, and this is going to be a fun one. Vanessa's fabulous. While you are watching, please tweet and message any questions you have for Vanessa or Heather on either YouTube or Twitter. Also, we're going to give away a 1-year membership to Alta to one lucky viewer selected at random. You've got to be a new subscriber to enter this contest, and the way you enter is shoot an email to events@altaonline.com with your info, ideally right now, but you've got until Friday at 5 p.m. If you don't win, don't worry. You can become a member of Alta and get this gorgeous magazine delivered to you 4 times a year for just $24. Again, altaonline.com is the place to sign up for that. Finally, please don't forget that it is super important now more than ever to support our authors. Buy Deceit and Other Possibilities and Vanessa's other book, River of Stars, from your favorite independent bookseller. You can do it right now as you watch. It will make you feel so good. All right, with that, I'm going to turn this over to Heather and Vanessa.
Thanks, Beth. Vanessa, I'm so excited to talk to you about Deceit and Other Possibilities. Vanessa's book is, this is a reissue from Counterpoint Press of Vanessa's book that was released in 2016. And it comes with 3 new stories that were not in the original edition, plus it sounds like some zhuzhing up of the original stories, and so we'll be talking about that a little bit. It deals with, as the title suggests, it deals with people being deceitful and lies and the power of the way that we choose to define ourselves, and how sometimes that can be a wonderful thing and sometimes that can be a terrible thing to manage that can spool out of control. And it deals with the immigrant experience in America and with how people choose to represent themselves to other people. So I'm really excited to talk to you, Vanessa. My first question is just, how are you doing?
Managing. I think it's learning about taking things day by day, and also a gradual lowering of expectations, let's say, in terms of, just how much I might be able to get done, or that to take joy in sort of the small things that can be achieved. For example, I bought a little show and tell. This is my sourdough starter. I dressed it up for today's show. I started it last week, and just being able to watch it chart its growth has been amazing. And, I've given away 2 jars to neighbors, been, baking bread, waffles, other things like, just being able to manage that feels like an accomplishment, on top of like other deadlines. But I have been thinking, like, we're just in this mass national collective grief and just trying to figure out our way through it, and just figure out ways in which we can connect with people virtually, and, figuring out how we can get through this all together.
What has it been like having a book that came out March 10th, sort of as all of this, as Northern California, the Bay Area in particular, was starting to shut down and shelter in place? Has that been different for you? Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to have this book release at that time?
Oh yeah, definitely. And well, it was I was actually supposed to do a couple events that launch week, and there was a lot of kind of question or confusion kind of up in the air. And one event I was supposed to do with someone from New York, and she was going to fly in, and I was like trying to explain, like, I don't know, it's up to you, but I live with my 81-year-old mother and my 8-year-old boys and my husband, and just like being concerned about that. And then another event I decided to withdraw before, but both events ended up being canceled anyway. And I mean, even in the best of times, when a book is coming out, you kind of have to leave your cave that you wrote your book in and put yourself out in the world, and it can feel uncomfortable or icky. But in a way, it feels like even more so when the world's falling apart, right? But it's interesting, when the first time the book came out in 2016, I was on book tour doing my East Coast swing, and it was right around the election. And so the day before, 2 days before the election, I was in DC. The event was joyous. People were so optimistic. Then the election. And then my next event was in New York. I had 2 events in New York, and it felt like a hurricane had hit. There were protests going on. People were just devastated. It felt like maybe even like 9/11 all over again. And at that point, we, the event organizers and the other authors, we decided to move forward with the events. And people who did show up said, I needed this space. I needed this space to talk about our fears, to remember life as it was and it could be. And I think right now, for authors whose books are coming out, it is, a book can offer a respite from looking at the endless news scroll. It can be, it can be a thought of like, what kind of world do we want after this? And it's just, again, as with my sourdough starter, still celebrating the joys of it. Like someone, I don't know, writing me to say, like, I felt recognized. I felt like I want to write my own stories now. You open that way. You still have to celebrate that. But of course it's muted. You almost sort of have to qualify everything that is coming. But it's just being mindful of the context that we're in now.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen the literary community coming together in different ways to sort of fill the gap for those in-person readings and book releases and things like that? Have there been things that you've seen online that have been particularly creative?
Oh yeah, definitely. I wanted to say I've been particularly heartened by things like Alta doing this online series, or through this online forthcoming books group. I got connected with this British YA author who created this book party chat hashtag, and she interviewed me one afternoon for an hour on Twitter, and it was so much fun. And then Saturday Night Stories is an ongoing series sponsored by 20 Stories LA, Ziziva magazine, and hosted by author Andrew Atchell, his book also came out recently. And that one was an interesting model. Each of us did short readings, like 5 minutes. And then if readers purchased a book, they could come to a Zoom after party. So, and we all did like sort of a stupid author trick. Like someone played a ukulele. I showed off my sourdough starter. I was thinking of playing my recorder. So it felt like an intimate conversation. I mean, I do my best to always go to people's book launches, because every book is a miracle. There's so many dead ends, wrong turns, points where you just want to give up. But I've been heartened in the ways that people have providing, mutual aid to each other in this way. I mean, not just for authors, but, and I mean, I don't think independent bookstores are out of the woods yet, but like, you keep hearing that, they're just getting massive amounts of online orders. And I think people really do care about their independent bookstores. And especially in the Bay Area, we're so lucky to have so many. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like how are the ways in which people are stepping up to support authors and also their bookstores.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I just want to remind everybody, or thank everybody who's just joining us right now, and remind everyone, if you have questions for Vanessa, you can tweet us at Alta Journal, one word, and we're having Vanessa answer those questions at the end of our little chat. So what was it like to go back and revisit these stories that you had written years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting. The earliest story in the book I wrote, I think in 2004. So like almost, and it was published in 2005. So like published, nearly a decade and a half ago. And in that time, I've, had kids, moved from Southern California and back. My father passed away. So in one sense, like each short story is a snapshot of the time in which I wrote it, like what I was thinking about, my influences, what I was reading, who I was as a person. And it was, when I finished the first edition, you kind of think like, okay, it's done. This is as good as I could have made it. And that's all you ever want for a work, right? But then, I get this question a lot from students, like, how do you know you're done? Like, how do you think of the ending for your stories? And it's, for me, a short story has to feel like there has to be an arc, and yet there has to be a sense of resonating, like a struck bell, like in a way the world does continue, even if you're not writing about it after you turn the last page. But I know people go back and forth about, is something done or not? I've heard of visual artists sneaking back into museums to like with a paintbrush to try and change things. And I actually just learned that this is actually doing a write through is common for playwrights. That particularly since maybe because it's a live performance, the sort of dated quality will sort of shine through if you don't sort of like, I don't know, stop talking about Friendster and Heroes or whatever was the sort of social pop culture cue at the time. But it was interesting to be able to look back on some stories. In particular, for instances, there were some metaphors or similes that I was striving to be funny, but given the context we're in now, was not as funny or just seemed unnecessary. Or a couple of the stories are set on universities, and I'd written them before the Varsity Blues scandal. And although I alluded it to that scandal, even though I never even never named it either, because then that would further date it in the future. But I think what this experience has shown me is that, yes, it's a snapshot, but yes, it's the book, whenever it does come out, is also to consider the context the readers are in when they're receiving it. And I talked to some other author friends who, I have a friend, Caroline Paul, she actually revised her memoir, I believe like 11 years later, and reissued it, or it got reissued with another press. So similarly, it's that question of like, it turned out I had an opportunity. For some authors, they might feel like, well, I just can't quit that story. I want to return to it until I get it right.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the connections to current events. And because this is a collection that deals with immigration or immigrant families a lot, as I was reading it, I was thinking it's, books are a product of the time that they're written, but also the world that they're born into. And so immigration has been an important issue in the news and for the United States in recent history. And then also the story Accepted that you just mentioned, and the college entrance scandals. Was there anything in this new edition that took inspiration from newer current events, or is that not something that's
Well, I had to turn in the manuscript last July. Like that was like the final copy edits, can't change anything after that. So yeah. It was interesting. I think one review, which was overall positive, was like, why didn't she mention the Hong Kong student protests? Yeah. And it's sort of like, I can't endlessly update with the context. And very little of that particular story took place it was just like, actually when it was set was like 10 years before any of the student protests. But I mean, that's just the thing. I think people, you come into it, when you put your work out into the world, it almost creates like a conversation, the conversation itself with the reader and what they take away from it, or what they're thinking about, or what they think is missing, or what they find is also an aspect to it. So, but you know, to reference like immigration, I did have a story that's set like in the sort of early 90s, but I did it's a retrospective narrator, and that's what we have is what we need. And I did reference the children in cages at the border, because it's sort of like he's grown up now, looking back, this is how the narrator thinks back to, you know, what happened in his childhood. So it is a matter of, you know, again, I spoke to some friends. It's like, would you want to be able to keep changing your book? Is that actually kind of terrifying? Or would you rather just say like, you know what, I'm totally thinking about my next work. And you know, you know you're finished when you fall in love with your next project.
Yeah. So that is a good segue into my next question. Are you able to work right now? Have you been writing? And if so, what are you working on right now?
Yeah. So I have been working on revising my novel, my next novel, Forbidden City. And, you know, it does happen in snatches and stretches and time that I can steal away, or when I'm trading off homeschooling duties with my husband. And at first it was very frustrating, because I think right as the pandemic hit, I felt like I was within a week or two of finishing it, be able to turn to my editor. But now we're going on week 3, and I think it'll be another week. But, and you know, who knows if other fires blow up that I have to tend to before then. But it's this thought, I made some peace with it, thinking if I can get through a few lines a day, a few lines will become a paragraph will become a page will become a chapter. So eventually I will get through it. So when that's finished, whenever that is, hopefully in, again, I don't want to put a date on it. Maybe I have some short stories I'd like to return to, and some essays as well. But, you know, it's interesting. I don't know if I'll necessarily be wanting to write something fiction with like a backdrop of the pandemic yet, because I actually don't know what impact it'll have on ourselves psychologically, creatively. It definitely will change our relationship to the world, but I don't know if for me at least, I don't know if I can write fiction that's sort of like on the nose based on what's happening to me right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because even in the time since our original written interview, the world has changed so much.
Yeah.
At that time, we talked about what was on your list of authors, who's on your list to read. Are there things, have you been able to read at all lately, or are there books that you're looking forward to reading soon?
Yes. I can't remember what I recommended, but I have been reading nonfiction, like that's, I would say, episodic. Like I just finished Marcelo Hernandez Castillo's Children of the Land, which is, was undocumented, now is not, but you know, is just beautiful. But it's told in sort of like not fragments, but in episodic chunks, where I felt like, okay, I can get to the end of this chunk and then put it away for the night. Or Valerie Luiselli's Lost Children Archive, similarly kind of the same form. But I also have a copy of Elena Ferrante's next book, The Lying Life of Adults, which is wonderful to read. But I can't really get through more than a few pages a night. I probably should work harder at that, because I remember one night I put my phone to bed like in another room and I just slept a lot better. But so I do need to work, I think, at ways of like carving that solace for myself, whether through poetry or fiction or nonfiction, and, you know, away from the news feed. There's no news I need to learn after 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. So
that's good advice for all of us, like put it away so that we can settle. But I also think, you know, there's a pandemic, so you don't have to be reading, you know, hundreds of books all the time.
Right.
I think just doing a little bit is great. Do you have a piece that you'd like to read for us?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I'm going to read a short excerpt from Deceit and Other Possibilities from a story called The Older the Ginger. Sometime after lunch, old Zhang realized he'd been kidnapped. On the way from the airport, his cousin had taken a detour. If he'd driven in circles or gone in the wrong direction, old Zhang wouldn't have known the difference. In the countryside west of Hong Kong on the Pearl River Delta, the rutted roads looked alike, and the flash of return, of welcome, hadn't yet arrived. More than a half century ago, he'd left the hills green with pine and bamboo for San Francisco and hadn't returned since. His cousin wasn't the son of an aunt or an uncle, but a relative of some kind from the village. Less than an hour into the drive, his cousin parked in front of a restaurant. They were the only customers at the only table. In the only staff, his cousin's daughter, Little Treasure. It was startling to find himself in high demand after his years among the bachelors of Chinatown. Finding a wife had been a competitive endeavor, and old Zhang hadn't much to differentiate himself as a suitor, just another waiter turned cook. Then his mother had written, insisting old Zhang marry. She was 93. He was 76. Come back, she told him. Come back and find a wife. Little Treasure dropped off toothpicks and a bowl of lychees and poured another cup of tea, but he refrained from drinking. He had a long ride ahead to the village. His leaky bladder didn't need more pressure, and the strong brew made him jittery. A few minutes ago, his cousin had excused himself to urinate, and old Zhang should too. But when he tried to turn the handle of the door, it didn't budge. It must be stuck, the wooden frame warped and swollen. Hey, hey, he shouted. Little Treasure tugged on his elbow. Uncle, eat, she said. She looked at him coyly beneath her lashes. Does it taste like how you remember? We filled ours with air, he said. During his childhood, his family ate meat only once a year during the spring festival, but this young girl had never known such want, only China on the rise and none of its turmoil. He knocked again and leaned his weight against the door. Locked. He searched for another exit, but didn't see another door, and the sole window was too small to squeeze through. He'd heard of brides kidnapped by grooms, but never an abducted groom. His cousin must want to present his daughter to old Zhang to make her the first and most memorable candidate for marriage, and the green card that came along with the deal. In time, she could sponsor her parents, her siblings, their spouses, and their children to immigrate, a prize her father wouldn't let slip out of his fingers. Uncle, eat, Little Treasure said. She had a broad, plain face, placid as a cow, her beauty residing in the cascade of inky black hair that fell to her waist. In a tight t-shirt and flared jeans, she was as tall as him and twice as strong, with the muscular arms of a model revolutionary. She could level weeds and enemies alike. She could pin him to the narrow bed that he now noticed beneath a calendar of beer models. Uncle, he'll be back soon. Sit, sit, you've had a long flight. He settled into his chair. Even if he escaped, he didn't know where he was or how far he'd have to walk to his village. Soon enough, his cousin would understand that love at first sight hadn't transpired. His hand crept to his thigh. He pushed it away. Let me help you, she whispered. Her face burned. He shuffled away, wondering if his cousin was spying through a crack to catch old Zhang in an indelicate position. And who could blame him? China was becoming a superpower that launched astronauts into space, put on an Olympics breathtaking in its scale and magnificence, and might soon become the Middle Kingdom around which the world revolved. But for now, his cousin and Little Treasure remained mired in this backwater, where old Zhang presented the best and only prospects. Little Treasure wept, burying her face into her hands. Young maiden, he began. Young, she asked. Her cheeks glittered with tears. You should see who they have picked out for you, girls pried from their dolls. I'm a leftover woman. You don't want an old ginger root like me, old Zhang said. The older the ginger, the hotter the spice, she said. When is he coming back, he asked. As long as it takes, she said. You're my last chance. You're not old enough to be thinking about the end, he said. No one wants meat that's gone off, she said. Call your father, he said. She pushed the bowl of lychees at him, which he ate to cleanse his greasy mouth. He spat the shiny pit into his cup palm, and he had another, savoring the sweetness. His mother used to peel lychees for him, digging in her thumbnail to break the flesh. Old Zhang had been his mother's firstborn and her favorite. When he was young, he followed her to the river where she beat laundry against the rocks. How mighty she'd seemed. Warm mud squishing between his toes, sunshine heavy on his cheek, and the smell of the river, of wind on water and churned earth. Little Treasure cleared the table, and he smelled the dank musk of her, straw and loamy soil, and all at once he remembered his boyhood, the life he'd left behind, and he was overcome with longing for this lost world. He closed his eyes, inhaling.
Thank you so much. That was lovely.
Thank you.
Can you tell people where they can find you on the internet so that they can follow along with the success of Deceit and Other Possibilities?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm on Twitter at Vanessa_Hua, and my last name is spelled Hua. I'm also Vanessa Hua Writer on Facebook and Mononoke97 on Instagram. Or you can, find the most updated information at my website, www.vanessahua.com.
Great. So we're going to throw it back to Beth. Hi, Beth.
Hi. I've got a question, I guess, for both of you. While this is a very literary discussion, Heather, you are backed by, I can only assume, classics. And Vanessa, your own amazing work. What are your, while we all shelter in place, what are kind of your guilty pleasure binges? How are you getting through this aside from reading masterpieces?
Well, the other night with some other lady authors from the Bay Area, Reese Kwan, Beth Nguyen, or actually she's elsewhere now, and Amy Afan, we did karaoke. We have a karaoke book club, and we kind of figured out a way in which we could both Zoom and karaoke all our favorite hits at the same time.
Oh,
yeah. And I'm also watching the Ferrante second season, My Brilliant Friend, and we're sort of making sure to hit play at the same time so we can live text our reaction to Nino and their outfits and all that.
I am binging Star Trek hard. Lots of Star Trek all the time. I like Star Trek, but I haven't seen all of them. So I've been watching Enterprise from the beginning. We watched Picard, and then my husband and I have been watching Next Generation again from the very beginning. So it's just been like Star Trek on all fronts.
And has Jean-Luc Picard looked exactly the same for the last 20 years?
Yeah, in Picard, he looks a little older, but he's so wonderful that, you just don't, you go, I'm so thankful you're alive and you're acting. So.
Right.
Those were unexpected answers. Karaoke and Star Trek were... Great question. All right, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I especially want to thank Heather and Vanessa for this. For those of you who were late to the party, we will have this entire conversation up on our website ASAP. You have until Friday to shoot us an email at events@altaonline.com to enter to win a free subscription to the magazine. Remember, you've got to be a first-time subscriber to win. Don't forget to buy Vanessa's book, Deceit and Other Possibilities, or her previous book, River of Stars, from your favorite independent bookseller. Don't forget to subscribe to Alta Magazine, $24 a year, or if you are venturing out to a Whole Foods or an open newsstand, you can pick up this current issue right now. And next week, we are really excited to have poet Tess Taylor. Her poem is actually, one of her poems is featured in this magazine. And she's going to be in conversation with Heather as well. So same time, 12:30 on Monday, Pacific time, same place. Thank you again, Heather and Vanessa, and thank you to everyone for watching. Stay safe, guys. Now we're gonna, presumably,